The federal hiring freeze has impacted tens of thousands of jobs across dozens of federal agencies, but there's some areas where they could have a lot more harm. There could be some serious consequences. Let's get into it. First, let's take a look at U.S. Forest Service, who has recently fired over 3,000 employees, or about 10% of their agency. We're in the middle of winter, and snow is falling on almost half of the country, but this is the time where you're training federal firefighters. And with the recent hiring freeze by President Trump, it has stopped the onboarding of seasonal firefighters when you need them the most. Within the Forest Service, you can look at their workforce size over the last 20 years, and they haven't really grown much. They're flat when you're looking at how many people actually work in the agency. But it's not just the Forest Service. We have a total of 18,000 federal firefighters across different agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management and also the National Park Service. The backbone of our wildfire defense is at risk, especially when you consider how long it takes to actually onboard a firefighter. And fire season isn't just confined to a few months anymore. It's pretty much year-long. This is the time where many firefighters train, prepare, and qualify. And even though seasonal might be in the job title of a firefighter, it's really year-long depending on where you're at in the country. If you're on the West Coast, I know most people associate wildfires with the West Coast in California, but that's different than the Southeast Coast or Alaska. They'll have a different timeline. And not all wildland firefighters are seasonal. It's about 25% right now. The ones that are seasonal, they come in maybe 9 months, maybe 6 months, and then they come back next year. And some of them are trying to make efforts to gain permanent full status. They don't want to be a temporary worker. They want to do it full time. Last year, over 24 Americans lost their lives in wildfires, and fires have cost billions of dollars in damage. So it makes sense to continue to hire this type of federal worker. You want to combat attrition. At a certain point, you're a firefighter, your body's going to give out somewhat, and you're going to be looking for something that's less demanding, maybe something more administrative. So why not be proactive and try to counter the attrition rate? That's not happening right now. If you go to usajobs.gov and look for Forest Service under the USDA, there's nothing here. No jobs open at all. There's a job here for veterinarian at the USDA, but there's nothing for firefighters. Politically, there has been some pushback. There's over a dozen Democratic senators that have been pushing for an exemption. That hasn't happened yet. And also, the new secretary of that agency, she said that they valued firefighters, but she kind of sidestepped the whole federal hiring freeze point of it. Another risk with the USDA is the Food Safety Inspection Service. They have about 8,000 employees. 6,000 are actually food inspectors. Last year, there was a bacteria infection, resulted in 10 deaths linked to a boar's head processing plant. This wasn't the only example. There was tuna, cucumbers making people sick. What mitigates these risks? What can stop this is actually having food inspectors. Right now, they're not hiring any food inspectors, just like they're not hiring any firefighters. And like we talked about earlier, it's the attrition. You can say, hey, they have enough, right? We just said there's 6,000 of them. We have enough. Okay, what happens when 5% retire and the other 5% decide to take better jobs? So now you're out 600 food inspectors. What type of impact does that make in this country? Another risk outside of the USDA is the Department of Energy. This agency is fully impacted by the hiring freeze. I went on usajobs.gov. I couldn't find anything for the Department of Energy. Now, you think of energy in one way, but let me tell you, there's a whole nother compartment. There's a whole nother sub-agency that focuses on nuclear weapons, warheads, things that have radiation that need to have safeguard procedures and need people there to keep watch. We saw that hundreds of those people were recently terminated only for the government to turn around and try to get some of those same people to come back to their jobs. And speaking of cuts, there's been over 12,000 so far. Some federal agencies where we saw the biggest cut so far include the U.S. Forest Service, over 3,000 people, Department of Interior, over 2,300. Then we had the Department of Energy with 1,500 people getting terminated, and the CDC with 1,300. And the IRS will be joining this list if they're not already by the time this video comes out. and the numbers will continue to rise, especially in certain federal agencies. There's two things to keep in mind here when we're discussing the federal hiring freeze. The first thing, if you go on usajobs.gov, you will see there's agencies still hiring: Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the VA, the Department of Justice. Right now, what the new normal looks like when you're applying for government jobs, you're only going to see about 6,000 open to the public, about 12,000 open to current government employees. That's a 50% reduction from last year. So what will happen on the third week of April or at the end of April, the hiring freeze should lift. When that lifts, we should be seeing an additional thousands of jobs being posted, especially in these agencies that have seen the biggest cuts. So the Forest Service, for example, they should be seeing a lot more job postings. That's one thing. The second thing, DOGE has an expiration date, meaning it will dissolve, meaning it will no longer be here. And that expiration date is July 4th, 2026. So next year, July 4th, next year. It's supposed to be a birthday present for the nation. Speaking of DOGE, Elon Musk is considering an interesting idea, and that idea could put money into your pocket. Right now, they're thinking about $5,000, up to $5,000 for every American household if DOGE is able to reach its goal and find $2 trillion, with a T, $2 trillion of savings. It ultimately represents a percentage of this savings, and it would go out on July 4th, 2026. Obviously, a claim like this is going to get people really excited, but he would need the president's approval. There's a lot of Republican congressmen right now that would rather take that money and pay down the national debt, not just give it to the American public. What will happen if you give it to the American public? They're going to be happy, but not just they're going to be happy. The stock market's going to be even happier, because when people get money that just comes out of thin air, if people all of a sudden get money, what they end up doing with that money is they go run out and they buy products and services. And the companies that sell those products and services, they end up getting an increase in revenue. So the stock market goes higher. So everything is valued higher. And then ultimately the people that didn't really have that much money to begin with, they're left in the same situation. But everybody who's holding stocks, they end up a lot more richer. So I don't know if that situation is going to happen. I personally do not think it's going to happen. And to be fair, Elon Musk did not think of this idea. It was presented to him through Twitter. And then he said, I'll check with the president to see what he says. Let's switch and talk about federal employees that were on probation and got fired. A lot of people are coming out and saying, hey, these were at-will employees. They knew the deal. They signed the job offer. They understood what the stakes were. They understood the risk. And to that, I want to say that the expectation when you sign a job offer with the federal government is, as long as you perform acceptable behavior, you will be retained. That is the expectation. The expectation is not, as the political winds shift, that you're going to be out of a job simply because you have the status of probationary employee. That's not the expectation. That's why so many people are confused. And then to add insult to injury, you're also putting on there that you're a low performer. You're using blanket language, and you're indicating that people are poor performers even though they have outstanding performance reviews. They could be one of the top performers in that office, and it doesn't matter. All that matters is they're low-hanging fruit. They were easy to cut, and they cut it. Why? So the numbers go up. So they can say to their base, hey, not only did we cut 100 people, we actually cut 1,000. Not just that, but we actually cut 10,000. And as long as that number goes up, the idea is the government is saving a huge amount of money. We're making a dent in the deficit, and the American people are winning, and people are cheering. They're getting energetic, and they're really feeding off of this energy that's coming out because they're making cuts. And what really is happening on the ground level is you're seeing people who were performing outstanding, who are now huddled around in a conference room crying, trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life. And half of the country is celebrating this. As I just mentioned, there are a lot of federal agencies out here hiring. But the question is, do you even want to apply at this point? Because the reputation of the federal workforce has taken a pretty significant hit. But surprisingly, there are some people that are still reaching out and contacting me, especially coming out of university, trying to use the recent student hiring path, trying to get into the federal government for either the reason that they want to serve, there's something in them that wants to serve, or someone in their family served, so they want to continue that tradition. Or two, the pension is still appealing to a lot of people because it is guaranteed money. And we don't know what's going to happen in Congress in the future, but even if the pension does change, there's a high probability it will be grandfathered in. If you're interested, you could apply now to the over 6,000 jobs that are open, or you could wait until the end of April, where there should be significantly more jobs. But if you want to understand the best way to approach applying for a federal government job, I want you to check this video out next. If you need a federal resume example, check out some of the links down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.